Hi, everybody. Welcome to Running to Win. My name is Kim White, and I am the host of Running to Win. And it is a joy to be back with you again today. I don't know what it's doing in your part of the world. I'm in Canada. It's a cold day. We got our first little bit of snow, with, of course, the promise of much more to come as we get into this month of November and head towards the Christmas holiday season. And we are an area that gets lots of snow every year. So some love that. I not so much. Maybe I should have been born in California or a warmer climate. I don't know. But anyway, it is what it is. And we're thankful for every day that the Lord gives us to be able to proclaim his word. I want to direct you, if you haven't had a chance, to check out the website of the ministry that is the umbrella for Kingdom First TV. And of course, as well, for my broadcast Running to Win, and also my broadcast Glory Unveiled Worship Sessions. That's on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Atlantic, 6 p.m. Eastern. There, a little plug for that one. But you could go to www.love-unity.org and check out that great Ministry of Love and Unity movement. And make sure you go to the headings, find out what they're about. There's also a heading there called Kingdom First TV. If you go on there, you'll get to see all of the other people who do broadcasts, all of the other programs. And not only that, check out, if you're into broadcasting, if you feel the Lord's calling you in that area, we invite you to go and to check out what it requires, what's required to broadcast. The fees are very reasonable, much lower, I think, than what you would find most places for broadcasting. Everybody's easy to work with. It's been a joy and a pleasure for almost 3 years now, and maybe I would say very close to 3 years, to be able to be part of the Kingdom First TV family. We started a series last week called Discovering God's Idea of Success. And I wanted to get back into that part two of that series today. I'll just give you a brief overview in case you didn't get a chance, but you can go back and listen to that part one if you want at the website that I mentioned, and also on YouTube under Kingdom First TV. And I also have it on my page, Kim White. Um, we talked about how all of our accomplishments um, don't may make us successful. Actually, okay, we talked about how all of our accomplishments might make us successful on this earth. But what we're really delving into in this particular series is, what does God say about it? What is God's definition of you and I being successful? What does he see that we do or we are or we embrace that makes us successful? We talked about actually how that even when after we're born, there are certain things that have really been put in us by God, certain desires, certain gifts, certain talents. And that often we will see a child that will begin, sorry, even in playtime, as children will begin to show or exhibit areas that they have interest in, and that they have they want to be when they grow up. We've also seen that at an early age, we can begin to see gifts and talents that our children might have in certain areas that would kind of lean us towards maybe what they would be successful at in the future, with the success that God has them lined up to be. God never designs failure. Now, there are times in our lives when we can all say, I failed, and God graciously picks us back up, dusts us off, and gets us on the go again. But God is invested in our success. And so we want to continue in this series today with part two. And we want to get into the area of some character traits and some behaviors of those who live a successful life. Now, I'm talking, of course, a successful life as a believer, a successful life in ministry, a successful life who is walking out God's plan in their life, what the world might view as successful. And I think last week as well, we went through an obituary of a person that I'd seen. It listed all of the successes, but we noted in reading those that not always what the world sees as successful is what God is looking at. Now, the thing about being successful, because we can put so much on our shoulders when we want to be successful, we can put all of the work, all of the stress and everything on ourselves, and that's never been God's intention. God says that his burden, his yoke is easy and his burden is light. He does not intend for us to carry things that bury us. He intends for us to carry things that elevate us. And so even in all of that, even with God's help, God's direction, and God's divine plan in our life, it doesn't mean that we never have issues. It doesn't mean that things are going to go perfectly and that we will never have an issue or a setback. There have been times when I have heard a believer say, somebody in ministry say, well, this could not have been God's will because I've struggled and I've struggled and I've struggled. Well, welcome to ministry. Welcome to God's plan. Welcome to the knowledge that it's not easy. It's not a cakewalk. It's not a walk on the beach. If it's a walk on the beach, sometimes there's a rogue wave that's coming in that's going to knock you sideways. The fact is that it is not always easy to perform God's perfect will in our lives. Success is not always an easy road. There are some people who have things handed to them. One of the things that I've noticed the most in my life, and just observation, is that a large percentage of people who just have things handed to them, because of who their mom is or their dad is or whatever, and never have to pay a price for that, never have to do anything. And not that we should have to strive for acceptance, but I'm just saying, if we go through our life, everything handed to us, sometimes we never reach the place where we're supposed to be because we're so used to just getting handouts and everything that we never learn what it is to be thankful, to be appreciative, to honor what's been given to us, and to dedicate and commit ourselves to. Sometimes we can just think if things are handed to us that, oh, well, if I don't like this, somebody else will hand me something else. That's not the case. We're walking in divine plan. When we walk God's divine plan, when we walk in God's success, we're walking in the way that He would have us walk. Sometimes there's lots of areas we can be pulled astray or whatever. So it doesn't mean we don't have issues. It doesn't mean that things go perfectly and we never had a setback. If I quit every time there was ever a setback in my calling, in my ministry where God had me at the time, I would not have made any progress in life. And there were times when I did quit because of setbacks in my earlier, I guess maybe less mature, less committed, less understanding of how it all works age. And if difficulty came, it just, well, couldn't have been God's will. But that wasn't the case. It was just that sometimes God's way of success is hard. And sometimes there are setbacks. But the great thing about when we live in God's plan of success for our lives, when we walk in His perfect will, when we walk in what God calls success, every setback has a comeback. Now that's a cute little phrase. Oh, your setback there's going to be a comeback for your setback, Then that's easy to say, but the fact is it's true. I've watched it time and time again in my life where it seems like the whole bottom is fallen out of my world and it just seems like it's over. There were things I could have, just as I talked last week about Job, I could have just sat on the ash heap and scraped my boils and say, I am toast. I am toast. It's done. It's over. But God had a comeback for the setback in my life. He had a way out of the mess. He had a backup plan. It actually was His plan all along. He saw what was coming, but He never left me, and He won't leave you either. This week in part 2 of discovering God's idea of success, we'll go as far in this as we can, but I imagine we'll probably need a second episode to finish this up. We'll see where we are at the end of this one because we've already used almost 10 minutes of it. But this week in part 2 of discovering God's idea of success, we're going to go further into the area of what God's idea of success involves. There are certain qualities necessary in the character of a successful person. I want to take some of those qualities that really any successful person should have, but I want to bring it off of the world stage and understand that there's a higher level of expectancy and there's a higher level of direction when it comes to be successful in God's way. These qualities may line up. But, sometimes actually some of the most successful entrepreneurs and some of the most successful business people who have had a connection with church and had a connection with God will say that they adapted biblical principles, biblical rules, biblical truths that help them to be able to build their secular business. It helped them to understand the structure of the kingdom that could also be the structure of what God was calling them to do. And people are called to the marketplace. You don't have to be behind a pulpit. You don't have to be, wearing a robe or wearing a preacher's collar or you don't have to be all that to be in God's perfect plan. People are called to the street, they're called to the business, they're called to the marketplace, and they make an effect that makes God shine when in the world today. So there are certain qualities necessary. Let's look at what the qualities of character that are successful, that are needed in a successful person, and let's see how they line up. Number one, a successful person is a person of vision. The secular definition of vision is the ability to think about or plan the future with imagination or wisdom. So in order to have to articulate a vision or to set a vision in motion, there has to be a plan. So a person with vision is looking at a plan. We see the vision was in Habakkuk, where God said, uh, "Write the vision down and make it plain." He was talking about, the things that I've shown you. Write them down, make it plain, take advantage of what I've shown you. And even in this day and age, God is saying, I've given you strategies, I've given you ideas, I've given you outlets, I've given you favor and everything. And I've given you a picture, a vision, maybe a thought, an idea, or whatever. And now I want to give you the ability to look at that with imagination or wisdom. Biblically, following God's vision is following divine revelation from God. What's God revealing to us? What's God saying? For some, He's saying, write that book. For some, He's saying, make that move. For some, He's saying, start that ministry. For Apostle Eddie Maestas to have ever started Love and Unity movement, God gave him a vision. Now, I don't mean that he woke up in the middle of the night and showed him the whole roadmap, the whole plan, the whole architecture of the whole thing. But God gave him something in his spirit that rose up and said, this is what God wants me to do. He was following God's vision. It's divine revelation from God when He speaks into our heart and He begins to say, these are the things I've put in you. These are the things I want to use you for. This is the way I want you to do it. And step by step, He leads us in His vision. We have to ask ourselves the question, what is God asking me to do? Sometimes it can be different things at different times. There have been times in my life when God was talking to me to do certain things. They were all under the umbrella of ministry. They were all things that God had given me the ability to do. But there were seasons of them. Sometimes a vision is for a season. Sometimes a vision is to accomplish something, and then it's time for something else. But biblically following God's vision is following the divine revelation from God. It's God's divine wisdom, God's divine guidance. Because see, when He gives us a plan, He guides us. He wants to guide us. Sometimes we take God's idea and we say, well, I know, but I think we could do this. And we start to augment, we start to add to, and we start to take away from, and we start to color it up a little bit and make it look prettier and everything. And it ends up being something that God never gave us the order to do, or He never gave us the instruction to do. A lot of times you're going to see a vision there that's going to fail, or it's going to need some work down the road to be able to continue. Biblically following God's vision is what is God asking me to do? What is He asking me to do at this particular moment? And also, where is He asking us to go? Where is He asking us to be? Where is He asking us to attach ourselves? What platform is He calling us to at a specific time? And we have to know that as individuals. I can have lots of people tell me where I need to be. I can have lots of people make me offers of where I need to be. I have to know His plan in my life. And sometimes I don't like what God is saying. Sometimes I don't like his plan. Sometimes I don't like the vision he's showing me. Sometimes there's things that I don't want to let go of. I don't want to move on from. I don't want to um, hand over. But I have to stay with God's vision, and and I have to go with his ideas. Um, I'm going to give an illustration here of following God's vision. I remember one time, actually, one time that God gave our pastor a specific vision for something, and different times, pastor will share with us because I'm on staff here, and our assistant pastor as well, and sometimes a couple of others, his board, of course. This is the way I feel that God's leading me. This is the way I feel that God's guiding us. I feel this is a direction we need to go in. Well, sometimes as staff, we think we have a better idea. He's looking at through the eyes of the Spirit. He's looking at through the divine instruction that he received, but we're looking at and saying, well, how's that going to work? We're saying, well, I don't see that. How are we going to afford that? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And then we'll give him our ideas. Sometimes we give him an idea that actually is like, wow, I feel the witness on that. I feel like that's the work. I feel like that's good advice, and it could be something that he missed in the divine instruction. Sometimes we're a help, but sometimes we as staff can be the biggest hindrance that our pastor has, or we as church members can be the biggest hindrance that our leader or pastor or apostle has, because we think we can tweak that vision. We think that we can tweak what God told our leader to do. We think that we can do it a cheaper way or a better way. But sometimes I've found with my pastor, if it's in line with a vision, he'll possibly agree. But then there are other times he will say, well, that's a great idea, but it's not what God told me. See, he understands the importance of lining up with the vision of God. The biggest distractions in our life from the vision that God has given us are not monumental swings to the left, monumental swings to the right. They're just a little bit different, a little change, a little veer, maybe a little step to the right or the left. But what we don't realize when we do that is that the end result of stepping away and not having our vision align with what God said can actually take us. If we keep walking that step away, it can mean that we end up continuing to branch out when we should have been right here, right in line with the vision or whatever. So success demands that our vision align with what God said. The important thing to note there is that it's probably a good idea to align with what God said. Why? Because God sees from the end. He sees the end from the beginning. We're sitting here, we see about 5 hours ahead, maybe. We might know what we're going to do tomorrow. Possibly it's Tuesday and we know what we're going to do for Sunday. But God sees the end result. He doesn't just see a few minutes up the road. He sees decades up the road. He sees what this can be. There's no better hand. There's no better hands to put our ministry, our vision, ourself in our plans in than in the hands of God. What I have learned, mostly from failure and mostly from not listening to anything that I'm telling you today, is that I will never have success unless I stick to God's vision. I will transparently tell you, I've had some major failures in my life, and it was for one simple reason. I did not stick to his plan. I did not stay with the vision. I'm a creative person, and I thought I knew better. I thought I knew the mind of Christ, but I was following the mind of Kim, or the mind of somebody else who had an opinion. And I'm learning, thank God I am learning that I have to stick with the one who sees the end from the beginning, whose vision is not limited, whose vision is not affected by world events, whose vision is not affected by whether the money comes in, whose vision is not affected by what people say or think or feel, whose vision is a spiritual vision that's not affected by the carnality of the people around him. And if we don't reach that point, if I don't reach that point, if you don't reach that point where our vision, what God told us, what he said to do is not carried out because of what other people say, we will never be successful. God's idea of success is when we stick with his vision. The second characteristic that I believe a person of vision and to have God's success is integrity. God is looking for people of integrity. And sadly, there are many avenues, many venues in this world today that might have a covering that looks really Christ-like, that might have a covering that looks really, really godly, but they are lacking integrity. So what is integrity? The Hebrew word for integrity is tam. It means completeness. It means wholeness. It means uprightness. It implies that there is no duplicity or hypocrisy in that person. When people say to me, Kim, you are a person of integrity, that's one of the greatest compliments they could ever give me, is to tell me that I have a character of integrity. Because God can use a person of integrity. Integrity means that we are not going to break under pressure. It means that we are not going to fall apart when things come. It means that we're not going to be led here and there, swayed here and there. When I think of the word integrity, actually, I think of architecture and infrastructure. I think of buildings. Sometimes people will talk, and I worked in an architectural firm for several years when I lived in Toronto, Canada. And I would often hear them say in their meetings, because the boardroom was right next to my desk, they would talk about the integrity of the structure. And as time went by, I learned what they were talking about. The integrity of the structure. Will it hold the weight and the stress it is supposed to? It might be a great structure when it's empty, when it's standing there with nothing in it, when it's standing there with no wear and tear, when it's standing there with no storms, with no stress. It might be a solid structure, but in the storms, in the times of pressure, when that building begins to load up with people and with companies and with supplies and with furniture and the elevators installed, and there's more and more and more and more weight on that building. When the wind blows or a force comes against them, we see in this age where it seems that there's so many superstorms, huge earthquakes, huge winds, tornadoes, hurricanes, devastation. We see devastation, beautiful buildings that lie in a rubble. Really, when you think about it, it would have to be quite a building to withstand a Category 5 and 6 hurricane and different things like that. But we look at those things and we realize that the integrity of that structure could not withstand the storm. And and then there's other buildings, and I found this interesting. I believe it was the Twin Towers in New York, if I'm correct. And also there are a couple of structures in Toronto, and they are actually built with sway. They are built now. Chances are you with your naked eye would not be able to necessarily see or the sway. Chances are you might not be able to feel the sway. But that sway is there for a reason. It's not because of the fact that they had a mistake in the building of it or the architecture, ever they left a few bricks out or something like that, or a few metal frames or something. It's because the sway gives that building a little bit of movement so that when the storms come and the strong winds come, rather than take the complete brunt of that little bit of sway will allow it to move with the storm and it will not break, and it will not fall. It's made in a way to withstand the storm. Well, God wants us to be people of integrity and that are made and that are built and that are able to withstand the storm. The truth is that many of us are taken out by the storm. We are taken out by the winds. We are taken out by the rain, by the snow, by the hail. We are taken out by opposition. We are taken out by any kind of coming against us because we have not learned to be to be able to sway with it, to be able to move with it. I have watched my pastor, I've watched other leaders, and I've watched them not be moved, um, not be visibly moved by what's happening to them, around them, or whatever. But then I realized when I was looking at this, they've learned how to move. They've learned how to move with the opposition. They've learned how to move with the attacks. They've learned to not be moved by moving. And that's exactly what's happening in these buildings. These buildings are not moved because they've learned how to move. They've been built to move with the storm. And because of that, they are not moved by the storm. God help me to get to the point in my life where I am built to move with the storm and not by the storm. That could be a quote. Maybe I'll call it a Kim quote. Be moved with the storm and not by the storm. And that is where we need to be today if we want to be successful, if we want to get to the point that we are not taken out. There's different times, I'll just mention as we get closing up this episode as well, while I was talking about working at Architectural Forum, that I would see one of the architects, that he has plans, he would take them back to our lead architect, to the owner of the company or whatever, right? And then I would hear, because it was a huge office, but it was very open. Architects always have everything all open and nouveau architecture and all this kind of stuff, so everybody sees everybody. But I would hear him back there and saying, I see what you want to do there, but this is why it won't work. Sometimes we have to go to God, and we have to be able to understand that God understood our heart. He understood the vision. He saw what we wanted to do, but he's saying, not right now, or this is not a good idea, or I'm not going to okay this, and this is why. Have you considered this? Have you seen this little part right here? Maybe I didn't see it. Maybe it's my blind spot. Maybe my idea was so great that I didn't quite see that part. Or another thing that's happened before that we've known is that people have built structures simply because of the money they would make. They have built things just simply because of how grand it would be. And we can actually think of, here's an idea right here. I don't have time to share it, but I will. We can think of the Titanic. The unsinkable ship is what they said. You can't sink the ship. But then that ship sank and people perished. And why did people perish? Because they had left out something when they were building that ship. They had left out putting enough lifeboats and enough life-saving apparatuses on that boat. They had felt so sure of themselves. There were certain areas that they had not taken care of. They had not covered. And because of that, many lives were lost. A lot of loss happens in the church today. It happens in the world today because we didn't really consider the cost. We didn't really, we cut some corners. And when we are going to build a life of integrity, we cannot cut corners. We cannot, I keep looking at the clock here because I don't want to go over. We cannot cut corners when we are going to live a life of integrity, when we want to see God's plan, when we want to be successful for God. Living a life of integrity means we don't cut corners. We follow God's plan specifically. We don't barter. We don't beg. We just say, God, this is what you told me to do. It's what I'm doing. Though none go with me, still I will go and I will follow. Well, that's it for this episode here. We're going to pick this up again next week. I'm a little fired up. I think this subject is really speaking to me too. And we'll go on with this subject next week. God bless you. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you for watching Kingdom First.